In this session, we'll look at Spring Gateway and some of the good practices, what can be used while creating the microservice. Uh, some fallback methodology wherein if your API is failing, how will you handle that? Why you'll use the API gateway, all that stuff. So in earlier sessions, we had a project which was been continuing. A demo project, which was like a piggy bank, but I've extended that over the weekend and I've created a project called Titan project, which actually is like small microservices, which has the user, transaction, login, um, accounts, and all those stuff. So I'll just give you a brief what exactly how this looks, and this will cover most of the best practice as well. So for instance, if you have a microservice called accounts, so this accounts is mainly using all those features which we have spoken earlier, Spring Profile, including the Liquibase, how will you create, update, all those DDL, DML queries while deploying the applications using Liquibase. We have all those options, plus the login service as well, which we discussed using Spring Security. So we have that over here, Spring Security. So one other thing which I had been telling when I didn't demo it properly was one of the thing was the getting common model and config jars. So basically what my model project, this small module contains is all the DTOs and models and the mapper which we discussed, I think in session 2, converting of DTOs to uh, entity and vice versa. So all this thing can be kept as a single project in a single module, which can be added as a dependency in all our microservices. This is on an assumption that this everything is on an assumption if you have multiple microservice connecting to single database. So that's on the assumption. If you have individual database, you don't need to share the entities. Basically, you can just make use of that. But it's worth that we keep it as a common model. So constants in one place within that same module, common exceptions, mappers, basically all those mappers which converts entity to DTO, everything, and your models, which essentially are entities uh, which will be connecting to the database. Okay, so this model will go as a dependency. This will go as a dependency in all your microservices. So every microservices, whatever entities are there, add it in model and add as a dependency over here, which can be shared across different microservices. I'm sure every not, for instance, the account microservice won't be talking to the uh, let's say transaction microservice, but via database, but it can certainly call the accounts microservice can definitely call the transaction microservice via a REST template or web client. So in that case, it's worth we keep it as a common module which can be shared and we don't duplicate the code. Similarly, thing goes for the config as well. So it's a very basic thing. I have the Swagger uh, uh, added over here, Swagger config. So we don't need to do anything. If you create a microservice, all we need to do is add this dependency. So what it will do is this config will be pulled up into that microservice, for instance in accounts microservice, and whatever information you want to pass on, it will just render. So you don't need to write the code for model your config. Same goes with the security config. Security config is actually, it depends if you want to authorize the token on microservice layer or you want to do it on the API gateway layer, or you want to do it on the both. Not a good practice, but it's worth we keep it in a different module which can be injected. So all in all, how it looks like, these common things are essential candidates to go as a dependency into these microservices. Okay, now let's start with like why we need API gateway in first place. uh, I have a small deck ready. One sec. Okay. Okay. Now let's say you have your application, let's say mobile or web application or any, let's say a different service altogether, which is consuming your service. So your client can can essentially talk to different microservices, which in turn talks to our single data source right now, but it can be multiple as well. The gateway layer, the best place to fit in is it's like a gatekeeper. It's like the place wherein you want your as an entry point to be authenticated, authorized, and only if it is authorized you will allow this flow to go to either M1, M2, M3 based on that. You don't want that all that authentication authorization to happen on every single microservice. It's not a good practice. And moreover, it is not a good practice if your UI application is having different host, and it's like tomorrow if the host name changes and something happens, it will impact your UI as well. So it's not a good practice. So all your UI is caring about the data and is one of the endpoints, and if that is serving, that's fine. Even if tomorrow if the instances host are changing, it will impact the gateway layer. So how so as I said, the gateway layer is responsible for authenticating and authorizing. So it will be like you will have another microservice which will be responsible for login or SSO. Now just imagine what we did in session 3 was the login microservice, which can sit over here. The accounts microservice, the transaction, the other microservice can sit over here. So whenever the request comes in, it can, if it's login for the first time, you can navigate the traffic via HTTP. Web security, which I shown in third session, is like if it is /authenticate user, you will just navigate the user without asking if it's authorized or authenticated. And then authorization can happen via this library itself. Uh, this is the core concept of gateway. Very briefly, uh, what it reduces is you can have your CORS configuration, which is like the cross origin scripting. Basically, what happens when that's a browser specific actually. So when your UI layer, when your web layer, from one host, one port, tries to communicate with one host different port or different host different post, it always checks for the CORS thing, which is nothing but an options call, HTTP method options call. And if it is success, then the browser actually uh, calls the endpoint and to get the data. So rather than having all those CORS configuration on each microservice, it's worth we keep it on the single layer. So that is one of the advantages. Authentication authorization, again on the API gateway layer. If it is failed, then just revert it. And if there is any change in that module related to authorization, if you want to plug in some other third-party tool, you can have an abstracted microservice which in turns can call the other service which you have taken. uh, yeah, so this is the API gateway layer. Another thing which I wanted to bring up is the orchestration layer. What is now? So it's not necessary that your UI layer would always want, suppose for instance if you want to render a small page, it wants to talk to different microservice, all three microservice. So it has to essentially do 3 API calls. So rather than doing all those 3 API calls, if there is any logical grouping of that module, or let's say a card, in your web application, mobile application, if there's a card, and to render that data you want to call 3 different microservices, rather than that you can create an orchestration layer. Orchestration layer is nothing but another microservice itself. It's just a term right now, which in turn can call the different microservice, get the data, and then return it. Rather than doing 2 different microservice call, do one API call. Because basically what happens is your UI layer um, um, is should act like a dumb component. It should only render the data which is giving it to you, and it should render it, rather than if this is the data then call this microservice. There shouldn't be much if and else, which will essentially hamper the performance of the UI application. So it's worth we keep all those logical thing in the backend. So that is one of the orchestration layer which we can take advantage of. Orchestration layer, we there's fin client module in Spring which you can make use of if you want to group different microservice responses and give it as one go. uh, you can either do it that way or you can use the REST template or web client. to do that. And in turn, yeah, your microservice can talk to Redis as well, wherein if you have any kind of caching mechanism, you can make use of that as well. Okay, so prior to gateway, why I'm talking about Spring Gateway, and if you guys have worked on gateway, or people who have used Zool before, there was a module called Spring Zool, which is not, it's not that way if it is not recommended, but yeah, Zool is kind of it was a Netflix's uh, oh, okay. It was Netflix's module which was being shared with the wrapper around with the Spring, and it was only it was not supporting reactive programming. So what they came, so the future of the Spring itself, as you know, all know that how reactive programming is becoming popular, if we want to consider the performance as well. So the module what they have is Spring Webflux. I encourage you guys to read that as well, which is a reactive programming. uh, I can give a brief actually. One sec. uh, I'll just try to give a brief how one sec, what is the reactive programming.
Rohit,
Yeah.
one question actually.
Yeah.
When we talk about the microservices, before microservices, we are configuring the gateway.
Mm-hmm.
So what about the Eureka service registry where we are configuring
uh,
in this diagram where it will come?
so essentially over here, one sec, where was I? Your service registry will happen over here. It will be another service registry at the gateway layer. Essentially what will happen is your gateway should know what is the service pointing to exactly, uh, because you will add your service names, service by name,
Mm.
and your this layer will essentially get the information where it is exactly hosted. So even your gateway should not know that where it should not be like 10 dot 5 dot blah blah blah. It should be rather than by name, and your this module will be responsible actually to get that information. So it will sit over here talking to the gateway rather than the microservices.
Okay, so the request will come through the gateway,
Yeah.
crossing through the Eureka service registry, finding the
Yeah.
microservices,
Yeah.
doing all these operations, and coming back. Okay.
Yeah. So your Eureka server and your config server as well. Config server actually can be shared across everywhere. That's fine, because there would be some configs in your microservice as well, which you want to change it on the real time. But yeah, Eureka server will host over here, which can talk to gateway directly. Okay. Uh, Coming back to the reactive programming, I'll just create a new one sec quickly. If you guys know, then give me a shout. I won't cover this one, but I'll just try to cover as much as I can. So what the reactive programming says is it's basically like a non-blocking IO, which Spring has off lately doing that. Uh, so what it says is like, if now just imagine if your request is coming into your server, your request is coming into the server, and one thread has been allocated to that request, which essentially goes into the controller, your service layer, your DAO layer, and to your database, which in turn it fetches the data. So what essentially happens is this thread which was been assigned, it this thread is actually blocked until unless this whole process is completed. So whenever there is an IO operation as well, for instance in this database, suppose if this database is taking 3 seconds, it's not a good time, I know, but if it is taking a huge query for 3 seconds, this thread is blocked over here. It can't do anything. And if your instances have been bombarded with many such requests, there would be a time that none of the threads are available, just because the performance is slow and they are not able to serve this. So in a way, what Spring Webflux tells us, reactive programming essentially tells us is that it should be non-blocking IO. A thread has been assigned, it, it processes all this information, and whenever there is an IO call, this is an IO call from your service layer to the database, the thread once requested to the database, it won't stop over here. It will go and serve the other request and come back here and take this response back to the user. So it is like a non-blocking thread, and which essentially improves the performance. There are different terms over here in reactive programming, just like one single object is called as mono, different list of object is called flux, and it's vastly, it uses the Java 8 map, flat map. If you can get, if you can just go through those concepts of Spring Webflux, it will be worth. Okay, so that's a brief introduction. That itself is a huge module, and it's worth having a look over there. Okay, so as I said, Zool was not a reactive one. Gateway is the future. Why? Because it's built on the concept of reactive programming. Just like if you have heard, uh, just give me a minute. I'm sorry, guys. There was a lot of background noise. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, so just like you must have heard for the REST template. REST template is supported till Spring 5. Again, REST template is blocking IO operations. So what they are suggesting is move on with web client, so that you can use it both blocking and non-blocking way, but they recommend using web client rather than REST template. After Spring 5, there is no support for REST template, so you should slowly migrate to web client as well, so applications move toward reactive programming. Okay, enough of talking. I'll start with the demo for the API gateway. What I've done here is like I have created the project. I've added the dependency. Nothing much. It is like Spring Cloud Starter Gateway and Hysterics as well, which I'll be demoing it uh, in a short while. So there are two ways to configure. So now just let's imagine you have for the sake of brevity, you just have only one microservice, which is accounts service. So rather than UI talking directly to the account service, let's let that request flow through API gateway. So to configure that, there are two ways. You can either add it in the config, or you can add it, I mean Java config, or you can add it in the properties file. I'll show you both ways. Let's start with the Java config way. Okay, so okay, I need to create a bean over here, which which is all the routes I need to specify, and this should take route locator builder, I think. Yeah, route locator builder. Okay, and I think they should return route locator. Okay, with this builder pattern, what we'll do is we'll create those routes. So what are my routes over here? I'll explain you one by one. So multiple routes would be there. So one of the routes which I'm adding right now is for the account service. So that's account service. That's the ID. And now let's take that predicate. Uh, how that will go is like, let's say you have a path which has a pattern, let's say accounts. So now just imagine, in order to hit the account service, which is this one, I'll have my URL having accounts. So let's say your API gateway is running on port 8080, and localhost slash accounts. Whenever there is slash accounts, it will register you. This locator will be hidden. So I have this path, and from here path, what I'll do is I'll add a filter. Why? Because right now, in my account service, if you just have a look, the context path I have set is API, which is running on 9002. I haven't put accounts over here. It doesn't make sense because Eureka server, as someone just mentioned, will have the host name as is. Like, you would know where you're exactly calling in, rather than having the context path specifically for that, because the whole microservice is concentrating on accounts. So over here, I'll add the filter. Uh, just close this. Okay. So what I'll essentially do in filter is, I don't once I get this account, I don't want this account anymore, because that is running on localhost 9002/API. There is no accounts over here. So I'll rip this account and just put in API over there. So the way to do that is, you would write a filter. There are multiple filters, API gateway filters you can choose. You can refer the documentation, certainly. So to have the filter, one sec, I'll just clean this clearly. Okay, I'll have the filter, and this filter would be like, I would rewrite the path. So what is my rewriting strategy? So what it says is, if I have anything like this source, if my source is something like this, let's say account, and it takes specifically regex. So there is something called segment, where segment is nothing but whatever follows after accounts. I'll just s- take that information, whatever it is there over here. What I'll do is, I'll take that, and new one would be something like this, which is slash API slash dollar segment. Okay. So now what this says is, if I have a request with accounts coming in and whatever segments follow by, just make sure that you append API and take that same segment back in, so that everything is intact, so it can call in. So basically I'm replacing. So you can have any kind of regex over here if you want to do any operation, or if you don't want to do that, everything is fine in your path which is coming in, it can go ahead. You don't need filters in that case. Okay. uh, I need to add the URL as well. I think, one second. So my URI would be, I think it was running on localhost 80, no, sorry, 9002. So I'll just add, so your Eureka server will come in. Someone just asked that question. So this should not be hard coded over here. If you're hard coding, actually, if you don't want to integrate your Eureka server, wherein you don't want the, you don't want to have the complex architecture over here. If you just want to take this local host 9002, all that host information, you can integrate config server and pull that information over here, rather than having two different things. So either you can go ahead with the Eureka server, or you can have the config server, wherein it is pulling all this information, host information. Okay. Okay, I think this, I need some brackets over here. Uh, dot build. I think URI is
Filter,
misspelled.
filter also.
Sorry, say that
Filters
again.
need to be closed. Filters.
I didn't get you. I'm sorry.
Filters, filters
Okay.
bracket need to
I
be.
got it. I got it. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Again, I don't need this. Okay. Yeah. Nice. So yeah, that's one of the routes which has been specified now, and this should work, I guess. Uh, this is for accounts, which is running on 9002. And my API gateway, I'll add an application YML over here. Let's run this on port 80 or 443 in production. So for local right now, since we are running it, uh, I'll just configure this to run it on port 80. I don't want any context path over here. There's no Swagger. So there's a challenge with the Swagger. I'll explain you at the end of the session. Either you can have a centralized Swagger, or you can have the same Swagger config and pull in this specs for each microservice. I'll explain you at the end of the session. For now, I'll just remove this. I'll set some logging level one sec, which will be great. Level. I think it's org spring framework. Spring framework. Okay, this shall put it at debug. Okay, server port. Okay, everything is fine. I'll just spin this up and let's see. Oh, before I spin this up, I think it's worth I keep some simple endpoint over here. A quick one. One sec. Test resource. A quick one. Okay, there's a message endpoint exposed in accounts. I don't want to pull in all the information from accounts. It will contact database and all those things. Let's keep it simple. So essentially this endpoint will just return a string, which is message from accounts. So I'll spin this account and both gateway, and let's see how this works. Okay. I've already configured this over here, which I've shown you earlier. Uh, so all those configurations are over here, and I'm running in the local profile. So yeah. Cool. This is open at 9002 now. I'll start the API gateway. Okay, yeah, local. Okay, a lot of logs have been spit. Okay, okay, fine. Let me just try to hit that instance using talent API. Let's say, I think I'll take a new one. Sorry. Localhost. Okay, I'll just keep it 80. Since it is 80, you don't need to mention the port. I'll mention the account because over here we mentioned account, and whatever comes after that, it will just append it. So the context, the get mapping, what I've kept in the accounts is message. We don't need all those things. Okay, let's see. HTTPS. Oops. 404 not found. Okay. Um, Oh, my bad. I haven't mentioned the bean, so it hasn't registered. I'm sorry. I'll just restart this again. So bean was missing over here, bean tag. So it was not able to get that. Okay, fine. I'll try that now. Oops. Enclosed. Okay, there's some problem over here which it is not able to identify. Account. There's a segment. I think there is some problem here. Oops, sorry, one sec. So expected a question mark. Question mark dot, which essentially segment. Yeah, this should be fine. So anything trailing after that, you need to append, and I had that double greater than sign mistake. Okay, let's try that again. Oops, same thing. Question mark. I have a segment which can be closed, and then this, and the replacement is, where exactly is that? Star.
There is one bracket before segment question mark that need to be closed now.
Oh yeah, I think I missed that. So that segment.
After segment.
Yeah, right. You're right. I think if I'll close that, I think I'll close it over here. Let me just recollect. Or else I have the backup. I'll just have a look. These regex actually you need to.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, let's give a try, or else I'll just compare with, because I've already committed the code. HTTP request now, so get is not supported API. Okay. Okay. One sec. I think I had committed this code. I think there's one. Yeah. I'll just copy this. In fact.
Okay, the closing is after star bracket closing.
Okay. I'll just copy this for now. It will be helpful. Okay. Okay. Fine. And I don't need Hysterics for now. Let's. What I removed? Hysterics filter UI.
Bracket filters bracket.
Oops. That route is closed. Then this is additional. One sec. I'll just return this. Oops. One sec. Yeah, I'll just keep this as is for now. I think what's happening is within that filter, I'm adding the Hysterics. So I just need to remove this. So this should be it. Yeah. Okay. I'll just spin this up again. Final time. This should work. Okay. Yeah. So that's coming from accounts. Uh, I'll quickly show you the way that's been added in the config as well. So in case if you have some more microservice, what you can do is add some more routes like this, the same way what we have done it over here. So let's say for this is like for the accounts, this for transaction, for login, all that information. So it will go over here. I prefer the Java config way rather than what I'm showing it right now. But if there is minimalistic configuration in your API gateway, it's worth we do it via config. Quickly add that as well over here. So that starts with like Spring Cloud Gateway. All this information is in the documentation. You can definitely refer that. Uh, so what are my different routes? So you'll have this is kind of a list of different routes. So what information you'll have, just like we added the ID over there, we'll add the ID over here as well. Then I have the URI. The URI is simple, the same thing, 9002. The predicate, now that same predicate which I added over there.
Typo is there.
Sorry.
Konal typo. Sorry, right. Typo is there. 9008.
Oh, 9002. It's running on 9002.
But you have you typed 9802.
No, it's 9002. I think that zero is looking like it, maybe by font. Okay. So my path is, again, as we mentioned in the doc over there in the config, anything which comes as account, and I'll add the filter. The basic filter is essentially the same rewrite filter. So Spring Gateway filter, I'll just quickly show you over here. There are lots of filters. Okay, Spring Gateway filters. I won't be able to go in much. So there's factories. Uh, so there are different filters. So basically you can mention that if you want to route at this one, you can specify at from what time to till what time you want to route it at this host. You can mention that as well. There are many other things actually based on the headers. If you have any such headers you want to navigate that way. Let's say in the header I'm passing one certain ID, and based on that ID I can say, um, let's say I have hosted one API gateway wherein the request is coming from North America. I want that request should go to North America rather than it should go to EMEA region. So all that information can be added from the filters. There are different filters altogether. If you see in the documentation, this is a not a comprehensive one, but if you have a look, search for Spring Gateway filters, you'll have that information. Okay, quickly I'll add the right. So here, rewrite path. So rewrite path is the same thing. It's worth I copy it rather than do a spell mistake again. Take this up.
We are looking into the second approach for doing the same, right?
Right, yeah. Okay, so same thing, account segment I've added, closed. I don't need the quotes over here, and this will be like API. Need to escape this dollar so that it can read via YAML. Okay, and this should work. I'll just disable this config for now, and let's see quickly if that works via the property file. If there are only the routes, and later on you can add one more filter, your custom filter as well, which will be in future, like if you want to authorize the token which you're getting. If you want to do that, you can certainly do that as well. I'll connect the login as well quickly and show you how that flows later on. I'll spin this up quickly and let's see if that message comes up. Okay, routes predicates values must not be empty. Gateway properties, I think I messed up something. Route 0, 1 sec. I think that's the problem. YAML is only having problem with the indentations, I think. What is the issue? Sprinkler, I think indentations are fine. Filters, rewrite path. Rewrite path is predicates, I think. Yeah. if you have the commercial versions of IntelliJ, it will autocomplete definitely. But this is, let's try this again. Yeah, works. Okay. So both the way it works, either one you can choose, and you can have your custom filters as well. You can have different filters altogether. If you have custom authorization filter, you have to create that authorization filter. And basically what this will do is essentially what we did over here in the login, we verify the token so that you can integrate that filter. I'll just quickly show you where that filter is, if you can recollect. uh, this one, what we just in the last session we did, I think it should be in config. Yeah, jot request filter. So this request filter, essentially we can invoke every time before calling the endpoint. It will verify if the token is correct or not. So the same filter, you can just copy paste it on over there and start using that. So, okay. So this is the gateway in brief. What we can do, you can definitely add one more filter, which is the cause filter, wherein you don't want that cause origin issue, rather than having @ cross origin on all the endpoints. For example, yeah, definitely you can do it that way, but not a good practice. Let's say for instance, if you can specify like @ cross origin, and you can specify the host, or you can just say it star. But it's not a good practice, and it's not worth you keep on putting on every controller or resource for every microservice. So it's like it's worth if you put it in the API gateway layer itself and let that bypass. So basically for the cause, if you have seen, Spring has given a very good uh, yeah, documentation on that, uh, which I had referred earlier. I think you can definitely use this one, filter registration bean. So you can use this filter. So what it essentially will do is it will get that options call uh, uh, completed, and so that the UI can do the actual call, like get, post, any call. So this is also important. This can also come in the gateway layer rather than. So the idea here is all the non-business logic can move into the API gateway layer and let the microservice concentrate on the business logic. That's the whole idea. Okay, another thing which I wanted to discuss was the Hysterics. In Hysterics, basically you can get to know if the service is failing, and if it is failing, you can return a response which is suitable, or rather than cached response. Uh, that is the way to do it. Uh, so for instance, let's do a demo kind of like, let's bring this down, the API gate, sorry, the account service down, and let's see how that behaves. So just imagine your UI is hitting the API gateway layer trying to access the accounts service, but that is not running. And yeah, so that is not running. So how this will look if I try to access that now? This is error because connection refused, clearly, and this is not a good way to do that. What the best practice would be, have the Hysterics implemented. So the way I did was, I'll just comment this out for now. I think you can certainly do it from here as well, but I would recommend use Java, because that will be easier to hook in all the information, all the custom filters and everything. Okay, let's add that one sec. I had copy pasted. Yeah, so that's a Hysterics config which I have added only because we have that Hysterics dependency. So this, for this specific microservice, what is happening is if there is any fallback, what is happening is it will forward it to service failure. There is an endpoint which we need to expose in API gateway itself, which can either call another downstream service, or you can decide the way you like it. If it's worth, if the entire account service is down, you can navigate to a there is something called as blue green deployment. I'll, maybe if time permits, I'll explain you. But yeah, it's worth we give a good message rather than that 500 error. So the way to do it is, you told that Hysterics, the fallback URI is service failure. And what I'll do now is, in this API gateway, I'll create an endpoint which is mapped to that service failure. So let's say test resource for now as controller, public string, oops, fallback method, and get mapping, and whatever mapping you have mentioned it over here, which is like a service failure, it will come over here. So if you have account service failure, you can mention that, or individually, I mean. So return, let's give a good message, account services down, please again later. Okay, you can certainly call the downstream service, you can get some cached response, a generic one, you can do it anyway. But this is the whole idea. If the entire service, the entire account service is down, we'll go granular. If a certain API within that account service is down, how will you handle that as well? Okay, now this is up. Let's see how this works now. Okay, now this is giving neat response that service is down, please try again later. At least you know something is, it is at least not failing, it is gracefully exiting. This is fine. Now suppose within that account service, the account service is running, but a certain API is down. Let me just quickly create a couple of service over here. A simple one which returns simple things. Okay, I do already have already. Okay, fine. So, oh, we create. So I'll create couple of more endpoints over here. Uh, let's say uh, I have message one, and I won't do anything over here. I'll just say throw runtime exception, something, some weird thing is happening in our service, I don't know, but I'll say error. So the way to do that is, what you can do is, you can definitely, you will have to enable Hysterics first of all. To enable Hysterics, I think I need to add dependency over here. One sec. Config, I'll add it over here for now. I think it's Spring Cloud. Oh, you have it. Spring Cloud Network Hysterics. Okay. It should pick up, I think. I'll just refresh this. Accounts. Yeah, okay. So this is imported. The Hysterics command over here. So first of all, I need to enable. Usually you will enable this on the circuit breaker. You will enable it on the config, but I'll do it now over here. Enable. I think, is it imported? Hysterics. Accounts, cloud network, Hysterics. I'll just run this one sec. Okay, I need to install this. I think library is not getting reflected over there. Okay, this is fine. Enables. Oh, why is this? I need to add the version. I think that pulls up from the cloud. I think, yeah. Okay. The other thing is, if you're trying to pull up the Spring Cloud config, I think I got it. So you need to specify the dependency repository, the repository from where it needs to pull in. In this case over here, I had mentioned at the bottom, which usually it gets generated automatically, which is like the dependency management. You need to specify the cloud version, which is the Houston not used now. Hoxton SR5. So for now, I think it should pick up something latest. I think, yeah, that's the one. This should work. Okay, test resource enables. That's something is really weird.
Rohit, there is an annotation enable Hysterics over there. Maybe that's what we are looking for.
Enable circuit breaker.
Precise.
Hysterics is, yeah, I'm looking for circuit breaker. Know why this happens every time. There's some issue with my IntelliJ as well. It doesn't pull up the latest ones, but I'm refreshing. Usually it does, and I can see it over here. 2.23 release. Is it coming? I'm getting Hysterics at least. Enable Hysterics. Weird. One sec. I'll just report everything over here. I think I had it. Yeah, I had it. Yeah. So basically what I've done here is, okay, I don't know what the problem was, but let me just quickly check the dependency. So what was added was Spring Cloud Start on Netflix, Hysterics, all fine. I don't know what was the issue. No dependency. This was not added. I explained, but I didn't add. Okay, fine. So you need to specify the cloud dependency as well from where it needs to pull up. Okay. Now you have the circuit breaker enabled and you have the Hysterics command. So basically what you're telling is if there is any error over here, fall back to this one, message 2, which in turn will come here. And if you have any input parameters over here, let's say string ID, something, you can definitely replicate that over here as well. Okay, the use case for this is, now suppose this is some complex business logic where it is pulling up reports. The classical example which we have used earlier was, suppose this endpoint is specifically pulling up reports from the database. There might be an instance where the downstream services are failing, or there is some issue with the API. We had a lot of issues with this API. The best thing was, what we did was, let's cache it. Let's cache this API, and every 1 hour we'll refresh this response in the Redis. So that was the idea whole. So this was hooked up to the Redis. I mean, this instance was hooked up to Redis, and every 1 hour the updated response was stored in the Redis. And if at all, if this API throws exception, it will come here, pull that information from Redis and return it back. So at least you will have stale data, but not a failing API. In that same response, we had last process time. So essentially, it was returning an object. Within that object, there we had an information last process time. So at least the user is not confused. Whatever the data they have pulled in, it is the latest data. So as a fallback, you can just pull it from Redis, from the cache, using cache mechanism. So Hysterics is implemented over here. And let's try out on the API gateway layer what we have. So on the API gateway, I think we have the config. Okay, the first example what we saw is the whole account service is down. So we had that nice good looking message. But now if an API is failing but the service is running, how that will behave? It should not give us this message, rather it will give the message from that same fallback what we did. Let's spin this up. I'll spin the accounts. Okay, while this is spinning up, you can certainly have Hysterics Dashboard as well, but uh, it can be cumbersome, but you can definitely have it. You can have another project altogether. There's a dependency called Hysterics Dashboard. Okay, I'll just spin this up. I'll explain you. Okay, now we have that. I think the endpoints, what we have over here is message one. Let's see if message one works. Yeah, normal message. Now we have message two, which will throw an exception and it should return me this one, message from fallback. So message two, yeah, message from fallback. So what it has done is it has given message from cache instance. You have different ways. If you don't want any stale data as part of response, what you can do is you can use Spring Retry. You can have the retriable over here, and you can keep retrying for at least 4 or 5 times, wherein it can pull the data, and if it is not, then eventually it will throw the exception. It depends upon how the business wants it. If you don't want that stale data, you can skip this Hysterics fallback approach over here. Yeah, that's it. But there's one other thing, which is Hysterics Dashboard, which I haven't covered. Hysterics Dashboard is basically like it gives you performance of the API, how's it working. So if I go start spring.io, if you add the dependency for Hysterics, so there's a Hysterics Dashboard over here. So this, you just need to create a Spring Boot project, add this library, and say enable Hysterics Dashboard. That's it. And from your API gateway, you just need to expose an endpoint which will stream the information, stream the data for the API, if it is failing or not. So Hysterics Dashboard, you will see something like this. I'll update this code base with that as well later on if you want to have a look. So yeah, something, yeah, if you have lots of API, you will have something looking like, oops, this is an API. One sec. Yeah. Think images. Yeah, so it looks something like this. So irrespective of how many services you have within that microservice, it will show. If it is an error, failure, it will show all that information. So it is just like an admin kind of a thing. And this is a stream information which you need to expose from your API gateway, something like this, not the initial one. Hysterics stream, which the dashboard will consume and render all this information. You can definitely check out on the Spring documentation. You can have that, so you can have the GUI for that Hysterics dashboard. One other thing I just noticed, I'll just mention about this one. It shows that it is in maintenance mode. That means most of the things, as I mentioned earlier as well, Zool as well. I think Zool as well is in maintenance mode. Okay, so that means Spring has stopped any further mode uh, improvements on these modules, and they will be only taking up the fixes, bugs if there are any. So no further improvements, but only bugs fixing and all those things. So list of, like, you can have a look of list of modules which are in maintenance mode. Modules in maintenance Spring, I think I had it. Yeah. So these are the modules which are in maintenance mode, so there won't be any future enhancement, but you can definitely keep using it as well. If you're not using reactive, you can move to Zool. Same goes with the REST template. I just showed something over here, which was the web client. What I was trying to do here is, I don't want the services should use REST template or web client uh, to call another service, sorry. Rather, I'll create an adapter, which in turn it will call the get post of, let's say today it's REST template, tomorrow it can be web client, later on something else, but my methods exposed from this library will be used by all the microservices. This implementation can change, but the method and the response type will still remain same, the way it will be used in REST everywhere. So the only reason why this approach you should use adapter is, if things keep changing, but whatever you have decided concretely, it's worth you use those abstract methods and let that implementation be abstracted. You can change it to REST template, web client, anything, but it's worth you have this good practice rather than directly using the REST template or web client. Okay, uh, I guess that's it from my end. Any question, anyone? Then I'll be able to answer. I'll commit. I think I've already committed this code. I'll make it public. I haven't made this public because I just started this one. Uh, you can use this for reference, and yeah, let me know if there is anything else if I need to do. Open to you.
Rohit, just a quick question.
Yeah,
So in our gateway, we specified the URL for the service, right?
yeah.
So in case if there are multiple instances of a service, so we will use registry. So in this case, how would we handle this? Or else it's if we remove the URL, it's part enough to contact via registry or
So
communicate on.
how that happens is like, now suppose if you have your host, and I can show you via example. It's my projects, but I'll show it to you. Let's say, oops, sorry, one sec. I just need to reconnect one sec, sorry. So basically what happens is when you deploy that service, you different pods are running. So you're giving a specific host, okay? That pod that service itself will be responsible which instance it needs to go and hit. I'll explain you over here, one second. So this is one of the QA instances. So let's say cube get all the pods. Sorry. Oops. Yeah, so these are my services. Now if you see, there are two services running for the same like two instances running for one service. So it is you can just give the host name over there, okay, and let this decide where it needs to navigate, basically. So giving a host name, it will be much better, because the host name can be a load balancer, or it can be one instance itself. It's dependent on you, so it's worth you give a host name over there.
So just to clarify, in your project, you're using Kubernetes, which is doing this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but in case if let's say it's a plain deployment and it's I have a registry,
Mm.
so in that case, or is it a valid use case or how would we?
Yeah, it's a valid use case, wherein, see, if your traffic is more if your traffic is more on specific service, so now I've used it in a cloud way. In the earlier company, I'd used it on the GCP, not GCP, the Cloud Foundry. As a pivotal cloud foundry. So basically what was there, when we deploy a service, we had an option to increase the number of instances of that same service, but that host name still remained the same, and that host name was registered with our service, wherein we like our API gateway used to get that name from that name of that specific service, wherein if we hit that, one specific instance of that same service will be hosted. So basically it was working like a load balancer, and we had given the host for that load balancer.
Okay, yeah, but that's specific to the deployment type, right? You either you deploy it in PCF or in or something else. But let's say over here only we have two different uh, account service running, one at like port 9001 and one at
Mhm.
9002.
Yeah.
Both are registered in the registry. Uh,
S- so you will need a load balancer, okay, and let that load balancer decide where it needs to go. You can have a sticky session, not sticky session, but definitely some mechanism where you will decide where the traffic needs to navigate. But that host wherein you have that information will go here, rather than one specific instance.
okay, yeah, I
but
got
but
it.
but but if you know there is only one instance running, you can definitely have the host and port over here. And if you want the traffic to be if let's say from evening 7 o'clock to morning 7 o'clock, there is less traffic, so you don't want to bombard another instance which is running on uh, high resources. You will shut it down, and you will move it to another instance which is less resource intensive. So you can have it configured over here. From time span, you can navigate to one specific instance with that specific host and port. another one at the different one with a load balanced host wherein you can expose that.
Okay, yeah, got it. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Anyone, anything else?
Am I audible, Rohit?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is similar to what Donik has asked. So
Mhm.
in this, we are hard coding the like local host 9002 URI.
Mhm.
So in the Java, we are hard coding. So in actual deployment, our host might be changing like from QA to production, pre-production. So how we should handle this?
Yeah, so this will essentially, as I said at the start, this is for the demo purpose, but we need to also hook in via the config server, either via config server, wherein you will pull all this information from config server. If you don't want to do that, you can maintain the profile. So basically, you'll all this information, you can specify it in profile the way we have done it over on different microservice, application local, application non-prod, I mean, QA staging prod. You can definitely mention account service URI over there, and you can pull it over here and inject it either
Yeah,
via properties file or config server.
yeah, that clarifies. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, I could not include a config server as well because that Spring itself is a huge uh, ecosystem, and if you want to uh, have a look what can be covered, you need to take a use case. For example, I've taken a use case, let's say uh, something which is like login transaction user, so day-to-day transaction, something like wallet application, which eventually I'll be integrating with UI, web and mobile both. So I've started with this one use case, got to know many more things which I've uh, shared with you guys, but you need to take one use case and start working on that now. So eventually, like maybe next week, I'll be integrating that config server so that I don't every time have to hard code all this thing. I'll introduce the web client, complete that web client module, so that later on the microservice, if it is calling another microservice, it should not use the web client or REST template, rather the adaptive methods which have been exposed. So this is all concept which you need to take a use case and start working on that, which will give you much clarity. Okay. uh, One other thing is the last one which you can have a look is if it's specific to what you have, you can cover based on the requirement. But for everything on the documentation, the Spring documentation is well maintained, you can have a look. And if you want to try out, based on what is applicable for for the project. So most of the things we have covered in last 4 sessions, not with the cloud ones like the GCP, Amazon, Alibaba, Azure, nothing on that front, but most of the things which can be used everywhere. So just refer to the Spring documentation if you have any questions, or give a shout out. I'll help you guys. Okay, thank you. I'll be committing the code. I'll and let you know. I mean, Neelam will let you know once that is ready.